Hey, Coach. Well, I'm so happy you found us on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe, hit the bell up above. We put out content just about every day. Also, go down below and check out teachhoops.com for coaches who want to get better. If you're looking to become a better basketball coach, you're looking for a mentor, if you're looking for resources, teachhoops.com is the answer for you. Go over and check it out and have a great day.
Hello, coaches. Welcome to another episode of Coaching Youth Hoops. Today we have an amazing guest on our podcast, Alex Sarama. And Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Bill, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast. So really excited for the discussion we're going to have today. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And if Alex's face doesn't look familiar, or if his voice doesn't sound familiar, we'll do a quick intro. Any YouTube search on his name will pull up quite a few videos. Coach, you've been pretty active on YouTube and teaching the game of basketball, and we do all appreciate that. But more specifically, you've been focused on kind of a constraints-led approach and ecological dynamics. Now, that is a mouthful that I can't wait to dive into and have you explain what that means. But currently, you're working with the Portland Trailblazers. Despite his English accent, he's coaching over here in the United States, or he had during the season. You're director of methodology for the London Lions. Again, another thing I want to dive into. Never heard of a director of methodology. You consult for NBA, NCAA, pro teams, sporting federations. Delivered clinics and camps for over 40 countries. Worked in Germany, Poland, Saudi Arabia, is that right? Sweden.
Correct. Yeah.
Norway. What else? Oh, this is another one. You've written the new global curriculum for the NBA. Oh my
Correct.
goodness. I definitely dive into that. But you've been a busy coach. And I think today, now as we're recording this, your book just launched today.
That's
So that's
correct, Bill.
awesome. So
Yep.
I will put a link in the show notes to your book. You
Much
can find that
appreciated.
you can find that on Amazon. So let's dive into that was a lot. And you've really taken a more of a studied approach to basketball, broke it all down, worked through different ways for us coaches to think about how we train players. And I'm very curious, where did this interest come from? I mean, I don't even know where to start. I mean, this is like an octopus. We can go in so many directions, which I'm excited about. But first off, you've been busy. Where did this all start?
Absolutely, Bill. So firstly, thanks for the introduction. It's going to be
Did I
fun to
miss
just
anything? I mean,
unpack it.
man, we could
No,
go on.
it's
Yeah. Coach, that's pretty
definitely all
impressive
bases
resume.
covered. All
Yeah.
bases covered.
Uh,
So I grew up in the UK, and obviously I'm very happy to say not a hotbed of hoops, and it's grown a lot since I was kind of a youngster playing growing up here. But I knew I wanted to be a coach from a very young age, and I realized I'd never be good enough as a player. And I just felt that if I wanted to have a career in basketball, I had zero connections in the game. I was like the first person in my family to ever play basketball. I knew I had to have something really quite different that differentiated me if I wanted to have a career in the sport. So I'd say like very early on, I was really drawn to the idea of continuous improvement, studying, and I just tried to do everything I could, watching clinics online, reading books to become a better coach when I started as an 18-year-old. And so I think what that did is it set the tone for me to naturally move towards evidence-based ideas. And all I mean by that, Bill, is that I think now we're so fortunate because we have research available to us in the field of motor learning. That's what it's called in North America, skill acquisition outside the US. But a lot of work has been done in this field over the last few years, over the last decade. And essentially, researchers and professors have done this hard work for us in, universities around the world by looking at what drives skillful behavior in sport and just how athletes can learn more effectively. And so what happened was I came across this research about 5 years ago, and I just realized that no one was applying this in basketball. And I mean, very few coaches, even in sports. And, I'd say some sports like soccer naturally were more coaches have been using small-sided games in sports like soccer for decades,
Hmm.
but it hasn't been as part of the framework, the constraints and approach, which we're going to get onto. But I found in basketball, even things like small-sided games are very foreign to coaches, where a lot of the learning environments, even today, are mostly drill-based, kind of
Yeah.
repeating techniques, etc. And so really I've just made it my life goal to try and transform the basketball world by breaking down the complexity of some of these ideas and really just putting it into translatable terms which coaches of all level can understand, whether they're a coach working with beginners or in the NBA, looking at what the science tells us and then how we can coach in a way which aligns with that science so our players can learn more effectively. And that's essentially everything I'm doing with Transforming Basketball, the name of my company and also the name of the book, and just sharing these practical solutions for coaches.
Yeah, and I forgot. Yeah, the name of the book is Transforming Basketball, so you can look that up on Amazon as well. But talk about the this idea of constraints-led approach and ecological dynamics. I never heard of ecological dynamics until I started reading your stuff. So,
Absolutely. So, it is quite a shocking word when you're first exposed to it. At least that's what I felt. Well, I remember
right.
how it felt,
Yeah.
5 years ago during the reading. I was like, what on earth is that? I think the best way to understand it for coaches is it's a framework, an evidence-based framework that we can use to actually understand human movement. Because this is what's really interesting, Bill. I think it kind of, when I do a lot of coach education, I often start by asking coaches, well, how does human movement actually occur? How do we function? How do we move as human beings? And it seems a very
Mm,
abstract question to start
hmm.
with. But the really, and it's no one's fault because as coaches, we're well intentioned. I was doing I was teaching fundamentals and doing all this stuff for years, before I changed. And I think a lot of coaches would give replies like muscle memory,
Mm,
whereas
hmm.
the reality is there's actually no such thing as muscle memory. And it's very difficult, Bill, because it goes against years of what we've done individually and also what we see famous coaches doing. And that can be quite a challenge to
Hmm.
grasp when it's just such an alternative approach. So really with ecological dynamics, it's a way of understanding how human movement, it's all based on the interaction with the environment. So what that means is there is always information which shapes movement, aka
Mm,
skills in
hmm.
basketball. So in other words, as if we know that players move according to what they're seeing, what information they're picking up in their environment,
Yeah.
as coaches, it means even a very simple task like dribbling. Well, players dribble and the way they dribble is based on what they see. So how could we maybe create a situation like a tag game for beginners or maybe a really simple one-on-one where they've got to keep the dribble alive in an area and there's just one defender who uses one hand to try and steal the ball. So it's really trying to make sure there's some type of decision in everything the players do.
Mm,
And
hmm.
the learning, aka a lot of coaches often would say, what about the technical skill, the actual movement itself? Well, the idea is that that's shaped and that will improve within the context of the players playing the game. So that's really where we get to the constraints-led approach, which was, the first part of that question. So the idea is simply that ecological dynamics gives us a really good understanding of human movement. So now how we coach, it changes how we coach. And it's a complex topic, Bill. I mean, it took me 3 chapters to explain ecological dynamics in the book with loads of basketball examples. But the constraints-led approach is a more specific coaching tool that we can use, which is based completely on an ecological framework. And the idea is we're just using constraints very specifically. And this is the cool thing. Coaches have been using constraints for years, Bill. The difference is it hasn't kind of been intentional and it hasn't been the whole time during a practice. So
Hmm.
all I'm trying to do is make coaches more aware of how they can use these constraints, and constraints are not just limiting factors. So yes, you might say to a player, you can only play in this space, or you can only score this way in this small-sided game. But it's a lot deeper than that. And really the idea is take a small-sided game. So that could be a one-on-one, a two-on-one, a two-on-two, any type of small-sided game. And you're basically just changing the game through different variations. So that could be the equipment you use, the space they have available, the scoring system, how they start, like how they begin within the activity. So the idea is we could have some small-sided games, but we slightly change it every time. So instead of doing the same game every time, which is what we've seen in the basketball world for years when players do play live, well, instead, let's just change it with one change, one small tweak changes everything. And that could be as simple as, okay, we're going to do the same activity with a 6-second shot clock.
Mm,
Everything changes. And that's this
yeah.
whole idea with the constraint set approach, just looking at all the different constraints available to us and why we might use them in a practical setting.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I mean, one of the things that, we do in our practice plans, at Coaching Youth Hoops too, we put, constraints in there, and we give
Yeah.
coaches ideas on, well, what is a constraint for this particular drill? Now, I
Love
would
it.
imagine the pushback you get, and especially let's take, for our audience, let's take a young third grade player just
Yeah.
starting out, okay? Maybe can dribble a little bit, shot, shooting with two hands. And now you're telling a coach that, think about this, right, Alex? Again, I know you've
Yeah.
been through this argument,
Absolutely.
which is, well, I got to show them how to shoot properly,
Yeah.
or I got to show them how to
Yeah.
dribble properly before they can, before we can, play in a game, or,
For
or just
sure.
I have to show them the mechanics of X move,
Yeah.
right?
We've all
So
been there. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So how do you, what is your answer to that? And
Absolutely. So honestly, Bill, that was the hardest thing with this approach, and that was the biggest thing I wrestled with early on.
mhm,
I didn't know how to do it well. So I've really figured out lots of creative solutions for this. And I think firstly, this is where kind of ecological dynamics helps, because what it informs us is that players are all going to move in different ways because
mhm,
every player's body is so different. So especially in something like shooting, players are going to shoot so differently. And we see that in the NBA and WNBA, with even like some of the best shooters have very unorthodox
right,
movements and shooting solutions. So I think number one, appreciating that there's no one size fits all. And practically, though, we've got to make sure that the challenge is just right, because for the learning to be optimal, it can't be too difficult and it can't be
right,
too easy, the activity.
mhm,
So if you're just gonna learn to shoot playing one-on-one with a heavily contested one-on-one, in all honesty, it's not going to be that useful. So kind of this most important concept for youth coaches listening to this is using constraints to make the tasks the right level of challenge. And what this actually starts with, and this is the heart, to be honest, this is my philosophy of why Europe is producing so many players right now.
mhm,
It's
mhm,
something called equipment scaling, and that's a form of constraint itself. So what happens in the youth ages in Europe, under 12s, kids will play on 8-foot rims with size 5 basketballs. So you can imagine that is the best form of constraint in itself, because
yeah,
naturally the players start shooting and moving and they can do far more skillful things just because of that. So honestly, I've thought about this a lot. If I was coaching the US, I would try and convince parents or a club just to try and invest on these 8-rim hoops and smaller balls. And I think that would make the world of difference. So then the idea is, if we can do that, then how can we use constraints in the activities? So, for instance, if I see a kid shooting with two hands, I might just put a constraint on them and say, you have to shoot with one hand. The key difference is, I'm not saying, all right, put your elbow here, put
mm,
your hand in this
right,
position.
right, right, right,
I'm giving them freedom to explore different, solutions, but still within the confines of a one-hand shot. Because as coaches, we know that shooting with two hands is not going to be conducive. So we could just constrain it. If we see them shoot with two hands, we just say turnover, do it again. And then the key thing is to make sure the advantage is big enough. So instead of having a defender really close, it could just be as simple as there's a defender who starts with the ball, and they're maybe kind of 6 to 10 feet away. They pass the ball from different places and they close out. So that's going to make sure the advantage is big enough. Versus if that defender's kind of right in front, there's no way that a beginner is going to be able to shoot the ball quickly and have success. So it's all about, all right, how can we change the constraints to make sure the level of challenge is just right? And I think appreciating that there's no kind of universal fundamental that's applicable to everyone. So if we can create all these environments, like a lot of what I do, Bill, is play one-on-one with beginners where the defense maybe have one hand to use, or they're holding a basketball instead of their hands. So there's still important information in the practice, but it's not too hard, and that's the most important thing with youth players.
Yeah, that's interesting. So in that case, then, for example, let's go through a couple of examples. So one
Yeah.
of the things that, one of the things I often say is, if you walk into a practice of mine, the biggest compliment you could give me is, that's an ugly practice.
Fantastic.
And for coaches who don't understand what that concept is, I try to, I mean, I'm getting a lot better now that I've been coaching for 20 years, is saying fewer things, stopping. But there's,
Love that.
there's certain things that, just, we
Always.
all have our pet peeves, and it's like, that is
Always.
non-negotiable, right?
Yep.
And so, I'll stop and explain. But, my practice is ugly in that I just totally believe in letting players figure it out, because that's game. I can
That's it.
teach the best offense in the world, which is the blitz attack offense, by the way, coaches out there. But even with that, I know it breaks down, and the defense doesn't cooperate with how we practiced. And so I want them to figure it out. Now, what I do say a lot is I give them concepts, and I have a whole series of ABCs, and my students can recite them. So it's always be creating space is one thing on the offense. I don't care what you do, just create space between. So for example, I have a third grade team, not a lot of outside shooters. So we need layups, right?
Yeah, that's
So
it.
I said, if you get in the path of your teammate, you're going to take away her layup. All right. So we talk about, and I'll just yell out when they're scrimmaging, space, right? And I constantly just yelling, oh, and I see them move, right? I see them move. Or
That's it, though.
or if I dribble at you, you have to do something. You can't just stay there,
Yeah,
right?
then
You're either going to
exactly.
cut, back cut, come for a ball handoff, what level ever, we're teaching, right? So is that the general concept of how you're thinking and what you believe
Oh,
in?
100%. And I actually call that principles of play, Bill. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the way to go at youth offense. And even at NBA offense, it's the same thing. And I call what you just explained, I try and have some catchy terms for everything. So I've got some principles. So like one is we don't want to ever allow one defender to guard two of us on offense.
Mm-hmm.
So just move wherever you can where we're not kind of holding hands and allowing one defender to guard two. And then I have this concept, it's actually a constraint called floor is lava, where if the players ever catch the ball inside the mid-range, unless they're cutting, it's a turnover. And what that does in every small-sided game we officiate it is the spacing becomes amazing. So you end up, you could do it different formats, whether it's 3 out, 4 out, 5 out, whatever. But especially at the youth level, I love just having a weak side dunker because, as you said, you have to get shot selection is the most important principle of play there, layups.
Yeah.
So kind of you're creating double gaps and allowing, I call it a gold medal shot. So we want gold medals over silver and bronze medals, ideally. And how they do that is spacing. So floor is lava in every small-sided game. If a player shrinks the space and they catch in the mid-range, we just yell turnover. And without having to say, you stand here, boom, boom, it's
Mm-hmm.
amazing what kids start doing after a week. And that's exactly it. I just think principles of play, conceptual offense, you can do it with third graders. You can have the most simple principles, and it's amazing to see what they do.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And one of the things that I did struggle with, and what I started teaching 4 out, 1 in, 5 out, read and react,
Yep,
very they're patterned offenses.
yep,
But what I have found is sometimes a pattern is good if it's the right pattern.
sure,
And what I mean by that is, uh, and I'll just use it again, I created the blitz attack offense because I wanted all 5 players doing something. And what I
sure.
found with a 5 out motion was, as an example, was ball side had all the movement going on and weak side became spectators.
Sure.
At the youth level again. We're talking the
Yep.
youth level, right? And they just didn't know what to do, right? They didn't know, oh, do I cut? Do I, you know, they're always trying to go after the ball. So then, then they're
Sure.
cutting over to the weak side's cutting over the strong side. And that's where the concept of space came in. Do I set a down screen? Do I exchange on the weak side? Do I just stand here? Like there was too many options and too many things for them. So
Mm,
not then what I did is I said, well, we need to create triple gaps because never had outside shooters, right? Even though
yep.
we practice it, they're not quite developed yet. So we need to create double gaps to get layups. So now I have both sides doing something.
Love it.
And but then now it seems to be counterintuitive to what you're saying. Is that, or am I getting way too in the
I
weeds?
I think you can have patterns. I think, at the end of the day, a set play is a pattern. I think
Hmm.
the key thing, it's got to be done to a way where maybe there's a really obvious opportunity in the possession. And what we don't want is for a player to miss that, like for instance, a wide open cutter or like a chance to drive because a defender's out of position and you can easily get into the paint and create an advantage.
Yeah.
The key thing is, I think it's so important where they're not running the pattern and missing out on those things. And that's where it's just getting the balance, right? And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
I think too, it's hard. It's funny, Bill, because it all comes down to the equipment too. And I think the reason why you're having to do those things is because the the baskets and the size of the ball at that age, it's no wonder they're
Yeah.
not able to shoot from outside.
Right.
Whereas in
Right.
Europe,
Right.
oh, if say I was, let's just say theoretically, I was coaching a third grade team in Europe,
Hmm.
we literally probably could just space and have like simple principles without kind of scripted patterns because they'd be successful and the defenders would have to defend them realistically versus what I see a lot in the US is the defenders completely pack the paint in almost like zones
Right.
because of the
Right.
shooting, and
Yeah.
that's the hardest thing. So
Yeah.
it's always a balance, I think, and I think it's kind of the same when kids get older. I think just when they get to like set plays and all that, I think it's so important to have them flexible enough where players still look to run a set, but they know when to break it off because there's a chance to create the advantage.
Yeah. No. Okay. Well, that relieves my anxiety a little bit on that concept. So the other thing that I created for this particular reason, and I understand that somewhat having spoken with a lot of coaches, outside of the United States, and what we're doing well and what they're doing well, and kind of
Mm,
melding the two thinking. I started a 3-on-3 league, uh,
love that.
and there are no coaches. What we do is we give the I have high school, it's a girls league, so I have high school girls players who are the coaches slash refs. So
Okay,
they're just the arbiter of the rules, making sure, there's safety and all of that. They
love that.
they will give instruction like, hey, go set a screen, or hey, create space. They're talking and refing at the same time. The idea was, as you know, and I don't know how this is in the UK and overseas, is kids just don't go out and play basketball
Yeah.
anymore. And it's so structured, and there's coaches yelling
Yeah.
at them, and then there's parents yelling at them. And one of the things, that I do in this league is I send out, you know, you can cheer, You can't give instructions, right?
Fantastic.
You know, there's reffing, but yet not really. It's just more for safety, right? And we'll call hard fouls and things, but
Of
yeah, we
course.
let them play, right? Even sometimes they'll take a step or two at the younger levels, right? And as it goes up, we'll tighten that portion up, but we just
Mhm.
let them play. And I had a parent comment, she didn't like this very much, but she goes, "This looks messy." And what do you think I said? I said, "Thank you. That's exactly the goal."
How they
And
learn.
she looked at me
Absolutely.
like, "What?" I said, "That's how they learn." I said, "That's why we do this, because we want them to learn the game on their own." So I guess
Exactly.
what I'm saying to you is, this approach and, practicing ugly, or you called it principles of play,
Yeah.
is how we learn. I mean, that is
Exactly.
mentally, that's built into us as human beings.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that's where some of these concepts have come from. And
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, you know, play is something just inherent to human beings. And
Mhm.
unfortunately now, as you said, Bill, like so many children nowadays aren't experiencing play because everything it's like an adult orientated environment that is being imposed on children. And everything is structured like AAU, work with a
Right.
trainer. And instead, you know, years ago, there was far more free play. Children would just play in the streets, play with friends.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
unfortunately, now AAU and skills trainers have replaced that.
Hmm.
That's why I think it's so important to have an understanding of this if you're working in youth sports, and consider how you can kind of take proactive steps in countering this. And that's why the best example you said is create a 3-on-3 league. I think that's the best thing, where maybe one practice becomes entirely 3-on-3. And this is why I love the CLA. You could even have different constraints for different rounds of games. So you could
Yeah.
have, you know, like one game could be scores off cuts a double. One could be scores off layups
Mm-hmm.
a double. One could be you play with floor as lava in the actual 3-on-3. So there's so
That's a
much
good
cool
idea.
stuff you
Yeah.
can do. And I think that's exactly the way to go. And I'd even say if I had an under 12s team, anything under 12, I wouldn't even like what we're doing at London Lions. We're
Yeah.
not even putting them in 5-on-5 leagues. And obviously the parents are far easier to work with than I think, unfortunately, what you see in the States. And it's not the parents' fault, but it's the society's fault because they
Right.
think they know what should be done. But we don't have the kids play 5-on-5. We just have them doing like 3-on-3 leagues with different constraints, more touches, more opportunities to get better, more decisions. And then when they get to under 12, that's the first lead time they play 5-on-5 with 3-on-3 still. So I think it's just the best way to go.
Yeah, there's a rec league that I'm on the board of, and we do a mix. We start them off on 3-and-3, and then they go 5-on-5 in the second half of the season.
That's great. I think that's an awesome balance.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and we try to do all 3-on-3 especially because we have two rec leagues. One is a little bit more advanced, and the other one is really beginners. And we wanted the real beginner league just to go
sure.
all 3-on-3, but then we got a lot of pushback. It's not real basketball. Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, of course
You know
I
what might be interesting, Bill, is I
yeah.
actually did some parent education at Lions, and we got a great group of
Mm,
parents where I actually had two workshops where I presented to them, and I actually showed the research because there's actually been
oh,
some good
interesting.
studies which have actually been done specifically on 3-on-3. And of course, as you can imagine, the research overwhelmingly showed the advantage to
Mm,
it. So what I did was I put the studies on, and they're easy. You can just download them on ResearchGate, and coaches listening to this can check them out.
yeah,
And every single study shows the benefits of doing 3-on-3. So I showed them, I sent them to the parents, and I said, this
mm,
is why we're doing it. It's not my personal opinion or preference, but it's what the science tells us is a more effective approach for your child.
interesting. Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
good. No, I like that. Yeah, and sometimes it does just take that education of the parents as well.
Yeah.
One of the things that you talk about a lot is this notion of fundamentals, and
Yeah.
what are fundamentals, and is it that I guess, what is your take on fundamental? I'll just ask it that
Great,
way.
great question, Bill. So I definitely don't want to sound like a radical. And like I said, I mean,
You already have, so right?
I taught fundamentals for years. You know,
Yeah.
that was my first 7 years of coaching, and as fundamental as it gets. And now I honestly don't believe in them, because I think with fundamentals, it's implying that there's one correct technique that we see in every scenario, where it's
Yeah.
passing, dribbling, shooting. So the classic example would be a two-hand chest pass, right? And
Hmm.
a lot of things coaches will say, yeah, but a child has to make a two-hand pass before they can pass with one hand. But it's just not true. It's not
Yeah.
true of how the human body behaves. And what I use is the word functional instead of fundamental. So
Mm-hmm.
I want, and I'm obsessed with players being skillful. Obsessed with it. That's my whole goal as a coach. But I believe they become skillful through being functional as opposed to having fundamentals. And even this idea of having a fundamental, the biggest kind of the easiest way we can dismiss it is that with ecological dynamics, we know that the human body doesn't store techniques. It just doesn't work like that. We don't store or have these patterns internalized. So if we know that, that has implications for just repeating move after move after move 1-on-0, because that's
Hmm.
not how we learn and move better. But secondly, it's the environment and the constraints within that environment shapes the skill. So for instance, in passing, you know, where my teammates are, the space on the court, my fatigue levels, the defender, the height of the defender, their wingspan, that shapes how I
Mm.
pass. So
Yeah.
what I'd rather have is have youth players who are extremely functional, so that they can find a solution to pass in any situation, being really adaptable, as opposed to just having this one chest pass technique, which when they go into a more chaotic environment, which is similar to what they see in the game, they're not going to be successful. So instead, instead of doing like a chest pass drill or having like a line drill where they dribble out, pivot, and pass back, we might just do something like pass keep away, where it's 3-on-3
Mm.
and they've got to get 10
Yeah.
passes in a row inside the 3-point line. Or even just playing something like piggy in the middle. And that's going
Oh,
to
right.
be
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
beginner can do that. And that's going to be so much more beneficial. And we're not saying don't work on fundamentals. I'm just saying reframe them. Consider really what the fundamentals are, and think about how you can get your players becoming more functional, as opposed to just being able to do these techniques kind of in a very stable vacuum, which we never get in the game itself.
Well, it's really interesting because I had we just finished up our winter season, and I took the last day to do, I'll call it a fun day.
Nice.
Basketball is fun on it, but we didn't play it. The focus wasn't basketball. It was um ice cream, it was
Fantastic.
knockout, and it was dodgeball. Okay. And my thought pattern in that was, one, just, hey, just, the day of fun. But at the same time, like, dodgeball teaches you how to move, right? How to catch.
That's
The same
exactly it.
skills you need in basketball, right? And the kids love knockout. It's a
It's the best form of warm-up, Bill. It's actually the
yeah,
science behind that is it's called a donor sport. So the idea is that you can actually, by playing these different sports, and you can do them as warm-ups in your practices. Basically, children develop more and a greater variety of motor skills. So then when it comes to
yeah,
playing
that's right.
basketball, they're going to be more skillful. And I love that. That's such a good example of it.
Yeah, and that's what we try to do. We try to incorporate, well, we try to incorporate all of that, but then the mental side of the game too. We train, but we don't do it in a traditional way. We do it, we call them comfort zone challenges.
Nice.
And so we'll take a team, and they'll have to, and it's really transformational. It's so fun to watch. They'll go out to a public shopping area, and they'll challenge strangers. It's all adult supervised. I always get those
Great.
looks like you're going to send a bunch of kids. No, no, no. They all have there's an adult leader in each little group. Uh, they they have to challenge a stranger to Rochambeau, rock, paper, scissors, right?
Mm.
And they have to document it. And now everybody has a phone, so they document it by taking a video of it. Now, for some players, you know, oh, of course I'm going to do that. Other ones were like, no way, right?
Yeah.
And those kids who say no way, those are the really ones I'm talking, you
Yeah.
know, that I really want to reach with doing an exercise. I have yet to have one of those kids say after that was awful.
Yeah.
They all say that was fun. And then I explain how that ties together to the mental side of the game, pushing yourself, creating challenges, right? Yeah, so was that really uncomfortable? Yeah, it was. But what'd you do? You did it and you got through it. Are you okay? Yep, I'm okay. Okay. Right? It's no
Mhm.
different than the game of basketball when you're doing something new, challenging yourself. Yeah, it's difficult to start, but you press through it. Anyway, we have all these mental challenges too, because we split the game up into two pieces. We built a framework around it called Red Dot, and coaches who've been
Fantastic.
listening to this, they heard it, and actually still have one from last night's practice. You can see that on my thumb if you're watching this. It's actually a heart. Last night's girl wanted to draw hearts on everybody's hands. So this is a pressure point. So when you make a mistake, they just like next play. They push it, you know, just
Very
like
cool.
here. Anyway, so we tie all of this stuff
Very cool.
in, so it's not just the game. And
You know what, Bill? I'd
um,
actually say that's a great example of using the CLA and mental skills, and that's the most fascinating part of it. And it goes a lot of the work I do in the NBA setting. You know,
hmm,
it's actually looking at how you use the CLA in all the departments. So not just using it for
mhm.
coaching, but
Right,
like you just said, mental skills, nutrition, athletic
right,
performance, player health, all you can use it in everything. And that's what's so fascinating, the deeper kind of you go into understanding all this stuff. But that's such a cool example with those. And I think too, if you're naturally doing all this stuff, kind of playing more live, more in practices, having the players solve problems, it develops resiliency far better than just using drills because the players are actually having to solve problems more and get used to doing that. Which guess what? That's what you have to do in the game. So great
right.
example.
Well, and you know, the one thing that I've learned over the last year, and we talked about it off air, was obviously this kind of a 3-to-1 ratio of practice to games. And I know that's big,
Yeah.
you know, where you're from too, and you've probably talked about that quite a bit. Um, how that is translating, I've never had this in the 20 years of coaching until this year when I started changing the way I think about practice.
Mhm.
We're beating teams that we shouldn't beat on paper, right? And you know, you look at the team and their success, and here's our team coming in, and they have better athletes than we do, right? On paper.
Exactly.
But we're beating them because you know of this constraint based, and they're figuring the game out on their own. This is a perfect example based on principles. You know, we talk about spacing, and you know, we normally run into man defense and or a zone, and it's usually a 2-3 zone or a one, yeah, 2-3. We've done it. We've seen 1-2-2, and we played against a 3-2 the other day. And
Hmm.
here I'm about to call a timeout, right? Because we never practiced it, and I see them do exactly the principles we talk about. They got a layup off a 3-2 zone. And I'm like, okay, that's a fluke, right? I'm thinking to myself, that's a fluke. Let's let it play out though.
Yeah.
They did it again and again. And I'm like,
S-
I'm gonna sit down. I'm
That's
gonna
it.
sit down, let them play, right? And I was just like, oh my gosh. Like they're figuring
So
the
good.
game out. I didn't have to call the
So
time. I
good.
didn't have to draw anything. Didn't have to, right, confuse them more on the sidelines. And so I guess what I'm saying, and by saying this, is this stuff works. So
Really
it's
does.
not just a theory.
No, it works. That's why I'm so convinced, Bill. And it's like,
Yeah,
it's when you try it, Bill, I've never met a coach who went all in on CLA and went back. It just doesn't happen because you
yeah,
see it with your own eyes. And this is the hardest thing, a lot of coaches like online. I mean, we're making huge progress as a movement, like
yeah.
loads of coaches are kind of all in on transforming basketball now and the work we're doing. but you still get a lot of coaches naturally who really believe in the fundamentals. And I think what I always say to them on social media or whatever is just try it. And if you
Yeah.
really commit to trying this for a couple weeks and you see the difference, the kids will love it. They're going to improve so much. You just never go back.
Yeah, and last night I was working on defense, and in the back of my head, I'm also, thinking about this interview we're doing today, and I did the traditional, offense versus defense, but I'm teaching defense, and I'm going through the
Yep.
movements and the
Yep.
spacing, right? And I'm watching this, and I'm like, this is never gonna happen.
Yeah. Sure.
But it's never going to happen. This script, this is wrong. And we talked off air, like something is missing. Like it's just it. I know it's, and I'm like, how many times are these kids gonna weeks? They're guarding somebody on the weak side. They're gonna be, and that person on the offensive person on the weak side is just standing still.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right? I said it's never
That's
gonna
it.
happen.
It never happens. Never
Yeah.
happens. And that's the whole thing with like shell drills and things like that. Just find ways to make it unpredictable.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do.
Well, do you still have concepts though? For example, now there's the no middle defense, there's the pack line defense. We do a version of the, lock left, right? So we're forcing people into the, left side short or left side, short corner, coffin corner.
Love that.
So in that particular case, if I have a philosophy, whatever that philosophy in
Yeah.
defense is, do you, are
Huge
I'm
believer in that. You got to have
yeah,
principles, bro, because without
yeah.
principles, it's just a mess and a free for all. So all kind of what I do is just kind of create an activity
Mm-hmm.
where I might even just use feedback and say to the players, look, I might just use instruction and say, our principles of play here are
Mm-hmm.
for center the coffin corner. So with our scoring system, if you get beat middle, your team resets, your score resets to 0.
Yeah, right.
So it's what I
Mm-hmm.
try and do is embed the principle of play within the context of some type of feedback where maybe it's a turnover if something doesn't happen, or
Okay,
it's a
yeah,
point, a point weighting system. And or I just tell them with feedback. I say, look, we got to look for these. This is an important principle of play. And I think the principles of play make it easier to use the CLA with a reason. Because if you don't have this vision for how you want your team to play, I would argue it's actually difficult to use constraints well. And it probably ends up being more
I can see
games
that.
approach, where it's
Yeah,
more loose, kind of anything can happen.
yeah,
And what I find is that when you have your vision for how you want your team to play,
yeah,
it makes it so easy to pick constraints because you know what you want to emphasize.
yeah, that totally makes sense. So, and that you bring up a really good point. So if I think about the kind of games-led approach, does does the constraints-led approach kind of sit on top of that
That's it,
concept?
Bill. That's
Yeah.
exactly it. So I would say coaches have been using elements of a games approach for years, and that's what I was when I first started doing this. And I think you
Mm-hmm,
have to
mm-hmm.
kind of do that because you got to get used to coaching with small-sided games as opposed to kind of like drills, and that
Yeah.
takes time. But the next level to it is using more CLA, which is you might have the same small-sided game, but you play constraints purposely. So you use constraints purposely. So let me give you an example. Let's say I want to take kind of like an old school games approach game, which is effective. So there's what I call it the chaser, where you have two teams on both sidelines, and maybe you have a 2-on-1 or 3-on-2 going one way. And when they cross the half line, one
Mm-hmm.
player from the other line touches the circle and goes in, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
if you play the same version of that every time, yes, I think it's better than 3-on-0, but I don't know how much new information they're going to pick up, how much more skillful they're going to become. So what we might do is start using constraints. So we might start by saying the only shots we can score are layups
Mm-hmm.
and catch and shoot shots.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then we might set the spacing. So what will often happen the moment you start using this game, the spacing is going to be a mess. They're just going to run into each other. And
Yeah.
they're often going to do like the 3-on-2. They're going to have the ball in the middle and both players cutting in. Disaster. So we use the floor as lava, and we'll say you can't catch the ball in the mid range, and maybe you have to
Mm,
create two sides. So that's where you fill the corner on the 45 on one side, and then the ball's on the other side. So it makes it far easier to convert advantages. So that's the whole idea. So it's like, all right, take a small sided game and just find small ways you can use constraints and change it every time in response to what you're seeing in your competition and your individual players, so that the
mhm.
new constraints you think of solve those problems that you're identifying in real time.
So basically, you want to create a library or a list of the constraints that you see in a
That's it.
game, and then checkbox. Okay, let's go
That's it,
one by
Bill.
one. Let's sprinkle them in through a
Exactly.
practice.
So you
And
you know
you know,
you're looking at the situations your players struggle with in the game, and you're just recreating those using
yeah.
constraints in
I
practice.
mean, I mean, if you
And it
think
sounds
about
logical, right?
right,
Yeah,
yeah, right, yeah, it sounds logical. You
exactly.
know, if you think about that too, and this is what I often say: if you take let's take a simple 3-on-3 drill, and if you tell players we're going to do 3-on-3 every practice, and I think in high school, right? Every practice, 6 days a week for our 2-hour practice. That's all we're going to
Mm,
do, right? They'd be like, "You're out of your mind, coach. This is the most boring thing," right? But they all want to scrimmage, right? But now, if you add in, you know, dozens of constraints, you have the same drill, but
that's
now it
it, Bill.
looks so
That's
different.
that's it. And that's the
Yeah,
problem, because if it's just the games approach, they don't become more skillful because they can resort on the same things. They can
right.
resort to do similar things, right? So
Yeah.
let's say a player struggles with their spacing or
Hmm.
identifying space. Well, they're probably, unless they're pushed into exploring an alternative, they're just going to keep that problem of maintaining bad spacing. Whereas if the constraints of the game force them into doing something different, sure enough, you're going to see a huge impact in a short dose of time. And that's why, for me, the best constraint build is just a turnover if something happens. So if they
Mm,
do something that is not allowed in the game, turnover straight
mm.
away. And that is the most decisive way to change what they're paying attention to within that context.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. So if I walked into uh uh Alex's camp, right? So you're doing a camp this summer. What would that look like?
Great question, Bill. So, firstly, I want to make every interaction I have with a player, whether they're an NBA player or a beginner, the best part of their day.
Uh-huh.
So, a transformational environment where I want them to be having loads of fun, lots of autonomy, and lots of learning. I'm still holding them accountable, don't get me wrong, but I'm
Yeah.
doing that within the confines of transformational coaching. So we might start with a warm up, and I might tell them to create a warm up game. And I might give them some constraints and say,
Mm,
there's got to be a decision. Or maybe I might say, you got to create a tag game of any format, and you're in a group of 3, create a tag game. Go. You got 30 seconds, and I want to see you do it. So straight away, I kind of set the tone that this is a very different environment, but this is going to be
yeah.
an environment where you're going to learn a lot and have fun. And then critically, the time on task, that's kind of the biggest observation coaches say to me when they see my practices. For 90% plus of the time, the players are active. So that means they're not waiting in a line or they're not listening to me talking. So
Yeah.
I have this rule, which was inspired by a coach called Mike McKay, who's probably been the biggest mentor in my career. And Mike calls it the rule of 30, where you try and describe a new activity, a new constraint, feedback, whatever, in 30 seconds. So what that does is it stops, the practice flow from being kind of excessively stopping all of that. And then kind of in every activity, I weave in these principles of play. So spacing, I call it dominoes, creating advantages,
Right.
triggers to create advantages. So, and then defensively, how we disrupt those. So how can we look to switch effectively? What's good ball pressure? What does that look like? How are we going to rotate on defense? So even players as young as 12, I'm getting these principles of play and they learn very efficiently because at every level, performance occurs within principles of play. So it's critical that they understand these things, and even things like take finishing skills. Well, finishing is going to come within the context of some type of trigger, like a get, a dribble handoff, a pick and roll, like all these things that from 14 plus, and even at the younger age groups, they've probably got to make a cut or beat a play off the dribble to get to that finish. So I really like combining these things so that instead of kind of looking at player development in separate buckets where it's shooting, dribbling, ball hand, like finishing, I'm
Yeah.
trying to combine a lot of these things into the same activities.
Yeah, the thing I like about that too is, teaching them something they don't even know they're learning,
That's it.
right?
It's all implicit learning. Yep,
Implicit, yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah,
it.
and yeah, and so for example, and again, I know this has been an amazing interview, but I do have one more question for you. So let's take another example of a dribbling drill. Traditional
Yep,
dribbling fundamental drill is everybody line up or go in a circle, and you're 1 against 0. Left
exactly.
hand, right hand, pound, crossover, etc. Right, and you do that for 5 minutes. That's your warm up, or you get some, cross court
Yep,
movement, maybe two ball stuff. Okay. Great. So now we move along and we're looking at the, constraint-led approach and more
yep,
fundamentals or more
yep,
fun, right? Fundamentals
exactly.
is,
Exactly.
we'll get everybody. So one of the games we call is Queen of the Court, everybody in the key and they're dribbling and trying to knock the ball out of each other's hand,
Fantastic, Bill.
right?
That's it.
So,
And
yeah,
what I try and do is just change. I give these activities names so the players know it, but I
yeah.
give them a little different constraint every time we play it. So, all right, today
Mm.
you're only using your left hand. Next
Oh,
practice,
right.
oh, every dribble has to be above your waist. Next practice, okay, instead of knocking
Uh,
their ball, you've got a penny tucked into the shorts. You pull their penny to get them out.
mm.
Next practice, oh, we're going to do this where you're working in pairs, where you're with a partner. Next practice, every time you dribble, you got to go touch a sideline before you come back in, every time you get someone out. So,
Right,
and it
right,
makes it
right.
really
Yeah.
creative when you start thinking about how you can scale these activities.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's good. Yeah, no, that's amazing. I mean, I think that, again, they're going to learn a lot more. And I know, over the course of 20 years, my first practice to what it looks like now,
That's it.
completely different, right?
That's it.
And even my approach to coaching, where old school coaching, yelling and screaming, and the more you
Yeah.
talk, the more your value goes up.
Yeah.
Right? Well, even in a game where, the more you talk, oh, he's the good coach, where now, like, as I said before, I just let him play.
Yeah.
That doesn't
Exactly.
mean I'm not saying, hey, space or stuff like that, but I'm trying to really monitor how much I say and when I say it, so it's more
Yeah.
impactful.
That's
And,
it.
going back to this idea, how many, it's we play basketball. It's not a job. It's
Yeah.
play for these
Exactly.
kids.
Should
And
be
we have
a
to
joyful experience.
joyful
Yeah.
experience, and they should walk away with memories. And, as the adults in the room, we have to make sure they are having fun.
Essential.
Um,
That's it. You hit the nail on the head, Bill.
Coach, any last words? This has been absolutely amazing. I know we could probably do another 2 hours talking about all this stuff. What it, how first off, get your book, right? And we'll put a
Okay.
link in the Amazon, right?
Fantastic.
So what's the second thing as coaches are
You know what?
changing their practices?
Yeah, I would say our website, what I wanted to do is I put tons of free resources and even video examples of me running CLA activities with youth
Hmm.
kids because I want coaches to feel like they have enough free material from us to
Yeah.
actually start doing this. So I'd say just go to transformingpeople.com, maybe check us out on Instagram, Twitter, like X, because we got loads of videos on there too, and send me a message. Like if you've got a question about something you heard from our conversation today, Bill, or something you see on the website, just get in touch with us through the website. I'll gladly answer. And I'll just encourage you to just try this. I think it will change your perspective on coaching and
Hmm.
life itself during this, and you are gonna fall in love with this approach. I guarantee it.
Yeah. And I am proof that it does work, because I've changed the way
That's
I
it.
coach based on a lot of what you've been teaching over the last year. So one, I appreciate that. I know my kids appreciate that. My kids I teach, and as well as their parents. I mean, I got this. Um, message, you're doing the right thing when I got this message from one of my players last night. She sends me, I had to do a school project, coach, and it was about what inspires me, and it had different balloons, and I was right next to her dog. So she had her dog inspires her, and then the level up is the name of my group, and I'm like, I've done my
That's
job.
what it's all about.
Yeah.
Transformational coaching in a nutshell.
Coach, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. It's been fantastic. Best of luck selling your
you, Bill.
book and everything you're doing. And I'm an advocate, so you got
I
at least
appreciate
one
that.
coach in your corner here in the States. So
Thank you
and
so
coaches, go
much.
check out Alex's stuff online. And give that website one more time where they can find
Absolutely,
you.
Bill. It's transformingbball.com.
All right, coach. Thank you. Until next time. Keep on teaching the game and keep on doing what you're doing. You're doing a fantastic job.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Coach, so glad you enjoyed the video. Make sure you subscribe and like. Second all, go check teachhoops.com for coaches who want to get better. Let me help you put banners and stuff in your gym and become a nationally ranked coach, win more games in less time. Teachhoops.com is a community that will allow you to do that. Go over and check it out and go check the next video out. Bye.